Folks still need more time, or are we getting pretty close?
I'm ready.
Anybody need more time? I think we're ready.
All right, well then round two, now that you've identified between 1 and 5 potential guardrails, now get with your shoulder partner and narrow that list down to 3. Between the two of you, come up with no more, or the 3 of you, as the case may be, come up with no more than
How about
3
us three?
potential guardrails.
Are you guys good working together? Okay. Whatever we say, oh, so you're saying you don't need to do the guardrail exercise? Okay. What? You bet, okay. So. Thank you for your honesty. And just sprinkle some pearl down on them. Is that cool?
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
So what's happening now?
Those 3 and
Okay.
those 2.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm still struggling with some guardrail. I'm just trying to frame it in a way that it meets the cuts, gets through. My value is academic seat time maximized. And my guardrail, the gist of what my guardrail is, if the kid's out of class, make sure he doesn't miss the information. That's the bottom line. But I can't tell him, do this. So I have trying to frame it into a don't do that. So when I said is do not allow students that have been removed from class or missed a class for whatever reason to miss the information that was presented while they were absent or unavailable.
You know, it's worth it. It's a draft. It's a draft. So say it out loud. Let people respond. Let AJ respond. It's a draft.
Yeah, and and I think in most cases they do it already, especially the kids that are sick.
Right.
I think the ones that I'm concerned about are the ones that are pulled out of class for behavioral issues and discipline, and they are sent over here in the corner. And they may not be disturbing anybody, which was the purpose of preserving the classroom, but it doesn't preserve their academic growth.
That was one of mine.
You want to hear mine?
Sure.
Okay. So for me, the first value, community value, that I heard from the community engagement we did that the first engagement plan is equity.
Okay.
So this is just very high level, but the superintendent will not allow inequitable treatment of students.
That's good.
Yeah. The second one is
Sort of close to the narrow.
so, you know, I looked at our 3 goals.
No, it's more of a.
Clearly, these were the 3 things that rose to the top for us when we wrote this, but they're not all smart. Yeah. So this one, this goal, every student has access to a rich, diverse, and rigorous curriculum. We couldn't really turn that into a SMART goal, so I turned it into a guardrail. And it's a little awkward, but I said, the superintendent will not deprive students of access to a curriculum that is rich, diverse, and rigorous. It reads awkwardly, but you see what I'm trying to do?
Yeah.
I'm trying to take this very important value and turn it into
A guardrail, which is basically what I was trying to do too.
and have it be consistent with the plan that we've already adopted.
Yeah, and I was thinking this value and the do not is what I've been hearing from my community, because our kids are constantly sit over in the corner. I sat in the office with one of my grade students, and this young lady got in the boys' bathroom, and she was mad because they interrupted her. And so she sat in the office with the secretaries and was fussing about, just all of my business. But I was sitting there waiting for them to talk to the person. She sat in the office fussing for half an hour because she didn't get to finish what she started. And she's missing class. You know, and she could have been in a corner with somebody talking about what the class was talking about, so that she could, you know, she was clearly capable of what she was trying. She's not in the class fussing about what she was trying to do, but she's not missing the academics. Well,
I'm moving, I want to make this campus perform better. So if it's not underperforming, you know, then you're not going to move kids around. And I'm going to type it. Yeah, I'm doing it. Schools, that's what we call it. No, I like it. No, I like it. I mean, I think it makes you, you know, you've got to make camp, you've got to make the schools perform, or you know, students are the right number, or well. Was this about students? Yes, about the number or percentage? Okay. But it's really about, I mean, I think this is the key word here. So if your school is performing, you don't have to improve it. Right. Okay. Got it. Anyway, so that's one. What? Yeah, that's it. So, do you like any of the ones that so, I like that one. I'm in a weird.
All right, 4-minute warning, 4-minute warning.
I like this one. I like yours. I don't know if you like this as much, but I like this because in that rigorous curriculum. Could be, or it could be, or we're just the teachers. I mean, the teachers are they buying this stuff yet? Or you know, I see all these complaints about it. I had coffee with the teacher. Good. Oh yeah, you told me that. So, you know, I think it takes time. That feels very operational. I mean, I guess these are operational things, but we've got two. So I guess the only thing is too, in terms of do not make decisions. I'm thinking I like that, but I don't know that you know it's getting like for something like this don't support, so we know quickly what that is. We're not going to if something's not evidence based, we're not going to do it. And like in here, I mean, and this. My fine print under here was thinking about the kinds of decisions that could negatively impact would be, you know, staff effectiveness, putting all first-year teachers at school, you know, that kind of thing. Magnet access, this is hard. You have to have, you know, what do you have to have? You have to have an email address for signing for a magnet because we've got family information. You know, school composition. So that's my notes of the kinds of things that fell under there, and then this one. Do not allow inequitable treatment of students. That's really important in terms of I think I like that one. I like that one. I would sort of say
That, and that,
Okay, well, we're supposed to come up with 3, so I think
that one do not fail. I'm trying to think that is. That one is, that was sort of.
yeah, it's hard, it's one of those double negative
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
hard to,
Right,
it's one of those
that's
hard
it.
to. But we have 3.
Now, if we go with that, if we ended up going back to that goal that we called out,
The 3rd grade reading, and the narrow thing.
yeah, we might need to add a guardrail that says,
I have one in here, in my scrap, I put it there. Do not negatively impact or quality rate rates of students not included in goal number 1. I mean, that was my shorthand way of saying it, of other subgroups. But yeah, that's, it's actually said in the email to AJ at the beginning, like saying.
All right, you need more time, or you got it down to 3?
Are you guys done? I'm just asking, or AJ just asked. You need more time? How much time do you need? You good, Ernest? You good, Brianna? Okay.
All right, so we go back to the practice that we did last time, where we'll have folks share from each group. If you could only pick one of the 3,
It's too hard.
which one would you share? So we'll go around and give all 4 groups an opportunity. Which one will you share first? Who wants to go?
That's hard. Do you guys want to go first since you had one that you were noodling on?
If you could only pick one off of your list, which one would it be? And don't worry if it's not worded perfectly. We can play with it a little bit.
All right, so Ernest and I have decided to present you with the one that says you may not consciously remove opportunity from one or more students in order to provide for another. So to explain that,
Yeah.
if you're looking at the sort of equity chart with people on boxes to see over a fence, right, that we all can envisage. If you got a person with no box and can see over, and a person with one box and can see over, and a person with one box and can't see over, you can't take the box from the second person that they require to see over in order to give it to the third person so that they can see over, but now the second one can't.
Got it.
So the statement was, you may not propose or take action. Oh, sorry, that's a different one. You may not consciously remove opportunity from one or more students in order to provide for another.
Got it. Thank you. Who will be the next chair?
Go for it.
Okay, so this one reads, do not fail to provide for the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of CMS students and families in district and school communications and decision-making. I'll read that again. And it's a lot. It's a big one. We can shorten it, but I wanted to start with more specific. Do not fail to provide for the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of CMS students and families in district and school communications and decision-making. And my thinking along the lines there is more specifically as I was thinking about, different physical challenges and disability students have, neurodiversity, obviously our limited English proficient families, and beyond, because I heard what you said, AJ, about there are legal requirements that we meet certain things, but I mean more of a sort of a culture shift and just really thinking about however we communicate to families, decisions that are made district-wide or at the school site, that folks are thinking about meeting the neurodiversity, physical needs, language needs, and our decisions, the value there being not to neglect those populations. Do you want me to read it again?
No. I've got it written down. I'm always a little bit leery of the language may not fail, as that often feels like a backdoor way of saying, do this thing.
Do not fail to provide. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Can you think of a way of communicating it? Because what I heard you say, I think is really important to capture, is that you don't actually want, you don't really want to create like a checklist that the superintendent and staff are like, okay, well, we did not fail to do this. Moving on. What I heard you say is you really want to create a shift in culture. Did I understand that correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and so I always worry about the do not fail to provide, because I've just watched that lead toward checklist treatment all too often. And so if you're going to take out the language, may not fail to provide, and instead we're going to try to identify what would be inappropriate to be true about the culture, or
Because mine has the same issue.
I'm trying
So when I first thought of it, I thought of the word neglect, but I didn't want that to be confused with like a legal obligation, because it's not really that I'm addressing. Although certainly we do need to adhere to that, and I know our staff understands that. It's almost like do not ignore, these folks, these factors, but I just didn't like that word, so I'm not sure. Does anyone else have a suggestion on how we could frame that?
Do not focus school and district communications to,
Without considering the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of students?
I don't know if that's still in I think that's closer.
Yeah. So it could be do not communicate or do not send communications or make decisions without considering the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of students and families. Would that work?
say that one more time.
Do not send communications or make district or school site decisions without considering the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of CMS students and families.
I've got the superintendent may not send communications or make school site decisions without considering the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of CMS students and families. That reads a lot more clearly to me, the culture you're trying to create. I'll read it one more time, make sure this is capturing what you all understand the value, your community value you want to protect and honor. The superintendent may not send communications or make school site decisions without considering the diverse language, learning, and physical needs of CMS students and families. Does that capture it for you?
Yes, that's what I was trying
right.
to communicate. Thank you.
Got it. 2 down, 2 to go. Who's up?
Can we,
You guys want to go? You ready?
The superintendent will not make decisions that disadvantage low-performing students.
Superintendent may not make decisions that disadvantage low-performing students. Got it. All right, number 4.
Well, here's a really broad one, but I think the number one, like the big value that came up in all of the community engagement that led to the strategic plan that we're in the middle of was equity. And so we had the superintendent will not allow inequitable treatment of students. There's just a whole lot of stuff that could fall under that, but
Yeah. All right. So you all have given the number 1. If you had to pick one, what would it be? Let's do a second round. If you could pick one more off of your list, which one would it be?
If we do what?
Who will be the first to share?
should we combine ours?
we've got one left. We can go.
Yeah. Can you do that one?
Can we? Sure. Do not allow the number or percentage of students at underperforming schools to remain the same or increase. Do not allow, the superintendent shall not allow the number or percentage of students at underperforming schools to remain the same or increase.
So essentially, what you're suggesting here is that the superintendent has to identify underperforming schools. And once the superintendent has done that, say, okay, there are these 10 underperforming schools. And they currently, each have 100 students. So we've got 1,000 students that we're working with here. And you're saying that neither the number or the percentage of students can increase above that current. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Got it. All right, who's next?
So this one reads, do not negatively impact the college and career ready rates of students not included in goal number 1. Now, that of course presumes that we accept goal number 1, but that is an effort, and that of course, if we all remember, is where we're specifically naming our Black and Hispanic students as a goal. So as a guardrail to counteroffer that, I think it's important that maybe we make a statement that we do not intend to negatively impact anyone's CCR rate in pursuit. And I don't know if it can be connected to a goal or not, but that was sort of the intent there.
Superintendent may not negatively impact the college and career readiness rates of students not included in goal number 1. Mm-hmm. Got it. Who's next?
So it is the board must have a goal in order to add said item onto the agenda. And if the goal is not on the said item for the agenda, then it cannot be added on there. Therefore, we could track what the goal is, and then we can do a direct reason to why we are having the item on the agenda.
All right, you are one step ahead of us in that we will come back to the idea of what are guardrails that the board should place on its own behavior. But before we get to that, we're having a conversation right now. What are guardrails what are values that need to be protected through the superintendent's behavior? Was the target of that sentence the board, or did I just misunderstand it?
AJ, I believe the target was the superintendent and staff.
Okay, I'm sorry, read that one more time. Please read it one more time.
Yes, I am. In order for an item to be added onto agenda, the goal must be connected to it in order for the goal to be on said agenda.
So I'll just add that the agendas are created by the board and the superintendent together. And we do have an exercise coming up where we are going to, and the agenda creation is governed by a bylaw BEA, and we have an exercise coming up where we will be making revisions to that bylaw, to how we create the agenda with student outcomes focused governance in mind. And so that's in the works.
Okay, so the way I wrote this down, and I want to make sure that I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm just trying to check for understanding. The superintendent may not add an item to the agenda unless it is connected to a goal. Is that what you're intending, or did I misinterpret?
Yes, that is what we are intending. When Mr. Shane and I were talking, we were referring to how if we have the goal, we can then track why we are doing the said item on the agenda in order to increase productivity in the agenda.
Got it. Thank you. We're missing one more. Who's got the last one?
Did you go yet?
Well, if we're in round 3 or 2?
No, we haven't gone
Round
yet.
two.
Go ahead.
There's one person left in round 2. One team left in round 2.
So Thelma and I had one that was kind of related, where mine was, again, very high level, and hers was a more specific example of that. And so we're trying to cobble it together. And mine came from so in our strategic plan that we're in the middle of, we had 3 overarching goals that came out of the values of the community. One of them we were able to, when one was more vision related, we were able to translate that into a student outcomes focused governance SMART goal. But the other 2, I was trying to turn them into guardrails so we could still capture them. And so one of the old goals was every student has access to more social and emotional support. So I tried to flip that around to say the superintendent will not neglect students' social, emotional health and development. And then Thelma had one that was, do you want to say it? And we're trying to merge them together.
It was, do not allow students that have been removed from the class or missed a class for whatever reason to miss the information that was presented while they were absent or unavailable. This is, the value was academic seat time maximized.
All right, so we've got 2 ideas here. The superintendent will not neglect social emotional health and development of students. Superintendent will not allow students who have missed class, missed the information that was presented while they were absent or unavailable. Those feel like 2 completely different ideas to me.
Yeah, I guess so.
Those don't feel mergeable. So the question is, which one of those is number 8?
Well, mine presumed that hers was already being met, because the first version of it said, in addition to whatever emotional behavioral support was being provided, already provided.
So you're saying keep the first one, not the second?
Well, I guess I'm asking, can't we merge in this, in addition to the support, emotional support and behavioral support already provided into the second, the one?
Yeah, if you all have a merged language, if you have merged language for me, I'm all ears. Hit me with it.
But I also, we also talked about how in our equity work that we're already doing, seat time is called out as a priority, protecting seat time. And what Thelma pointed out was her constituents need to see that value very specifically
As a-
listed.
Yeah, and
All right, so delete the first half then.
And Ms. Carroll had do you have a suggestion?
Well, I think that the guardrail you proposed first, the superintendent will not allow inequitable treatment of students. There are things that fall under that really well, and discipline kind of procedures fall under that very clearly, as do things like condition of facilities and educational opportunities. So I think that as a broad thing covers the notion of discipline, in my mind.
And there will be interim guardrails that that staff comes up with, but we're not allowed to kind of,
But you aren't creative, that's correct.
yeah, we can't drop hints about those.
Sorry, I just dropped a hint.
Pardon?
The hint dropping will be largely discarded, yes. So I'm still not clear about what my eighth idea is. Is it the first one, is it the second one, or do you have merged language for me?
Thelma, what do you think?
I don't know. I guess I was still struggling trying to stop my idea of a guardrail from being a directive.
Can I offer, because I think you're really talking about discipline issues, right? So if it were, do not allow student disciplinary actions to interfere with the student's educational opportunities?
That's a broader way of saying it.
Do you want me to say that again, or did you get it?
One more time, please.
The superintendent shall not allow student disciplinary measures to interfere with a student's educational opportunities.
It's also almost more narrow in a way, because when I first heard you, I was also including, illness, just chronic absenteeism for whatever reason, like being out.
All of
So
that
that
comes
is
under
even
seat
more
time.
Okay.
specific, although I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
Replace,
student
so
chronic
do you
absence.
keep disciplinary measures, or do you replace disciplinary measures with absences? The superintendent may not allow student absences to interfere with educational opportunities, or do you want to be specific to disciplinary related absences?
I said discipline because that's what I thought Thelma was going to, and frankly, if someone is, I think it becomes harder for staff to control if a student leaves town for 3 months without a forwarding address. We can't
Catch 'em up.
do anything about
So
that.
Thelma, is this
Discipline.
about protecting
Discipline.
seat time, or is this about providing academics when they're not in the seat?
Is providing, let's see, what I said originally was when students that have been removed from class or missed a class, which I thought was going to catch the kids that were out sick. So I said, for whatever reason, whether it's discipline or health or travel or whatever, to miss the information that was presented while they were absent or unavailable. So it catches both the disciplined student as well as the other absentee students.
I feel like upstream from that, prevention is protecting seat time in the first place,
Yeah,
is preventing the problems and mitigating the problems that lead to loss of seat time.
or providing alternative opportunities. when seat time is missed for whatever reason.
Well, that kind of gets back to my first suggestion, which was do not allow disciplinary measures to inhibit educational opportunities.
I like that one. I like that one.
When you said for disciplinary measures, then you hit the nail on the head that my community was talking about. But it misses the other guys that are absent for health or whatever.
Maybe that could be an interim guardrail that, maybe some of that could be picked up with something staff might be doing, that hint, hint thing.
No hinting. That's, staff's job is
Didn't hear
to
that from
figure
me.
out what do we need to do to get there, not us tell them what they need
Right.
to do to get there.
But my concern is that this turns into a do not do that AJ was saying we can't say.
All right, so far I've got the superintendent may not allow student disciplinary measures to interfere with the student's educational opportunities. The superintendent will not neglect student social emotional health and development. The superintendent will not allow students who have missed class to miss information that was presented while they're absent or unavailable. However, we need to condense all that down. You only get one. Which of those?
And are these things that like the 18,000 employees and the 9 board members need to be able to rattle off the tip of our tongue once we've adopted them?
So definitely the board members and the superintendent, yes. Like if the 10 of you don't know what your priorities are, then nobody else is going to care either. What I've seen as a fairly common practice that I enjoy, that I certainly use with my team, is, we'll post the goals and guardrails around the school system to ensure that folks have an idea, have clarity around this is what we're all moving in the direction of. But in addition to that, the board will be monitoring progress relative to the goals every single month, 12 months out of the year. In addition to that, the savvy superintendent, recognizing that the goals and guardrails are the superintendent evaluation, that the way you evaluate your superintendent is you look at the evidence of compliance with the guardrails and accomplishment of the goals, and that is the superintendent evaluation. And so because that is the superintendent evaluation, the savvy superintendent will grab all the goals and guardrails, look around at their cabinet, like, all right, this is a piece you're responsible for, there's a piece you're responsible for, there's a piece you're responsible for, and align all of their evaluations with the pieces of the goals and guardrails that each of them have accountability for. And then the savvy cabinet member will go to their direct reports and do the same thing, who will go, to the principals and do the same thing, who will go to the teachers and do the same thing. And so there'll be this cascading throughout the organization, not of all of it, but of the pieces that are most relevant to their particular function within the organization. Once that's cascaded all the way down to the classroom, then teachers are going to turn around and say to the principal, okay, got it. I understand that this is part of what I need to help accomplish in the lives of the students that I'm serving. But given the students that I'm serving, here's what I will need next year to be able to move in that direction. Yeah. And then the principal accumulates all of that from all of their teachers, and the principal hands that up to the principal supervisor. The principal supervisor hands that up to the cabinet member. The cabinet member hands that up to the superintendent. And the next time you go to adopt your budget, the superintendent says, here are the things that came back up from our teachers and frontline staff that said we can accomplish these goals within these guardrails, but here's what that will mean. And so here's the changes that we're making in the budget, and here are changes we're making in policy, and here are changes we're making in staff pattern to accomplish the things that the board has put forth in its goals and guardrails. So it's not that every single member of the organization will have memorized all of them verbatim. It is that ideally, you should be able to come back a year from now, and every single member of the board should know these cold. Like if you don't know what your priorities are, don't expect anybody else to treat them like priorities. So step one, do your job and lead the culture of the organization by being conversant in what you say the priorities of the culture are. Same thing with the superintendent. But then you should expect that that is cascaded out and so that people are familiar with their pieces of it. But that generally people know, oh, we have one goal, that's in the area of early literacy, one that's in the area of secondary math proficiency, one that's in the area of post-secondary readiness. They should at least be that conversant. So like the high-level topic areas, hey, these are the areas that we're focused in on as a school system. And similarly, they should know the high-level topic areas of your guardrails. But will all of them know every single, that's not as important. Now, I will tell you, my last role where I had a large enough team to go through this similar process was when I was deputy commissioner in Texas. And certainly, not only did I have all of our goals as a state agency committed to memory, but all of my direct reports, my cabinet did as well. And all of their direct reports, various division department directors, certainly had memorized the specific goals or guardrails for which they were uniquely responsible. And so that is what it looks like in a healthy organization, to cascade this work throughout the organization and then be listening for the upward cascade of what do we need on the front lines in order to accomplish these things, and then that needs to inform resource allocation, policy, strategic decision making, and central administration.
That makes a lot of sense.
It does, and part of the discussion that Elise and I were having about how important it is for students that are out of the class to catch what was presented in the classes, because there are a lot of, math is specific, but there are a lot of other classes where if you didn't get this piece today, you're not going to be able to do the next piece we're going to teach tomorrow, because this was built on that. And I specifically had a student who could not grasp how to divide fractions. And he said, well, just let me go on to the next. I said, baby, I cannot let you pass this, because the next thing you're going to do won't work if you don't know how to do this. And so we're just going to sit here and do this and do this and do this until you get it. But that's what I was trying to work at with the kid. He may have, or he or she may have become disruptive because they didn't understand it. If you take them out and just spend the time that they're out of the classroom working on that one thing that they didn't understand, then maybe their behavior will be better when they get back to class, because now they do understand it and they can go on to the next step. And therefore, they keep learning.
Carol had a,
I think there are two issues that we're combining. One is preventing loss of seat time, is keeping kids in seats versus mitigation because kids are absent, whether for whatever reason. And I think we may need to separate those and pick which lane we're going to be in, because I think they're two different things. One we can control more aspects. I mean, we can put we can make a guardrail that says, for whatever reason, if kids are absent, we have to supply the educational materials that they've missed. Or we can have a guardrail that's about decreasing absences for whatever reason.
or maximizing seat time.
Maximizing seat time. So I think there are two different issues that I think it's going to be hard to create one guardrail that covers everything.
All right, so so this is the right conversation to be having. This is exactly the right conversation to be having. So now you've got to figure out which of these is most important, which is kind of the highest need, highest leverage item that we want considered. If you had to write that up, how would that be worded? How might that be worded?
That's
At some
high
point,
enough that,
whoever's in charge, I will need the ability to share my screen.
say that again? That last bit?
Whoever's in charge, at some point, I'll need the ability to share my screen.
Oh,
Yeah.
he's just saying at some point he's going to need to be able to share his screen.
Yeah.
So can I ask, if going back to your goal, Elise, around making sure the social emotional needs, I mean, would that take care of the one aspect that you're referring to in the restorative practices and things like that? To keep kids in the seat?
So.
Like, would that suffice?
So what I'm thinking, this is the way I was approaching it. Like, I kept mine really high level because these are, like, I wrote down 3, thinking these are the top 3. If I could capture the values, these are the top 3. Because you have to prioritize. I don't, and so I was thinking if staff is going to value equity and going to value social emotional support as they figure out how to do their work towards our goals while honoring those guardrails, they will come back with, okay, if we need to maximize seat time, we need to really solve that. How do we keep kids from missing class? And if they do miss class, how do we support them so that they get the content they need? So I feel like that's for staff to come back with, whereas we're setting the high-level guardrails to stay within. That's the way I was approaching it.
And I was thinking mine was more specific and heard it under what she was talking about.
Are we going to do
Right.
a round 3?
No,
Okay.
and so, and they're actually on the verge of losing access to round 2. Because
So broad or narrow, Thelma?
Broad.
Okay. So then we'll go with the superintendent will not neglect students' social, emotional health and development. Unless that's too direct, that's like a backwards directive one.
Nope.
Okay.
All right, so with that, I am prepared to share my screen so that you could see the host disabled participant screen sharing. I think I need to be also elevated to an
Working on it.
attendee rather than a participant, or panelist rather than a participant.
And you might have 2 AJs there too, so.
Oh, did you,
You have 3 AJs.
That should do it.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're
I should
fine.
clarify that.
That's
So-
weird. I'm the co-host.
Yes, there's a
And everybody, this is, for everyone on Facebook watching, this is Jamoki Hinton, who is one of AJ's assistants.
Great work, everyone.
she, one of the other coaches for this team, who apparently is named AJ tonight. And I
Big AJ and little
need-
AJ.
Okay. Host disabled participant screen sharing. And so try the other AJ. You've got a third AJ, try that one. Because I've got a separate screen open specifically for sharing so I can actually see you all at the same time. Oh, there we go. I now have the power.
3, AJ number 3.
Yes. Sorry, so complicated. All right. Here we go. Welcome to Guardrails.
Thank you.
All right, so here are the ideas. So we'll have the same conversation we had last time. Are there any of these that could be combined or share a similar theme?
Does number 3 combine with Wait. Sorry, let me slow down. Well, does do number 3 and 4 combine?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm glad you all can read that.
Are there any of them that can be combined or share a common theme?
I don't know.
I mean, I have a possibility, well, that's exactly what I was going to say, because that was my broader version of number 2. When I said number 2, I also had one similar that was the superintendent will not allow inequitable treatment of students. I would add "and families" to it in order to combine them. My longer.
So you're thinking, are you saying 2 and 4, you think are similar?
Yes, they are in many ways.
And what if you had to give it like a 1, 2, 3 word kind of topic? What is the message? What's the topic?
Equity.
It's equity and consideration of diversity. It's just for B, I would write of students and families if I were combining them to.
All right. Are there any others that could be combined? Or that have a similar theme?
Back to 2. Jennifer, did you mean equity and consideration, period, or equity and consideration of diversity?
Consideration of diversity.
Are there any others that could be combined?
You have a question about that one?
Well, not a question, and this is probably not the time to wordsmith, but I thought about inclusiveness is where you were going with that.
It is, yes.
Okay.
In being welcoming. I mean, that's another way to say it, that do not allow schools to be unwelcoming to students and families, and that would accommodate for the difference in cultures, language, learning abilities, physical needs, that everyone is welcome.
Okay.
That's the value I'm looking for, belonging, a sense of belonging.
Yeah. Are there any others that can be combined or share a common theme?
To the extent that 4 and 5 are both deal with sort of academic performance, they would fall under
Any others?
That's the agenda one, okay.
Social emotional standards.
What's number 6? I can't
Oh,
read.
no, I
It's-
kind of
it's
think
something that may
neglect.
not
I think
neglect,
so.
but I can't read the rest of it.
6 is the superintendent will not neglect social emotional health and development. Okay. Or will not neglect,
Social emotional health and
students' social emotional health and development.
It's health
Really, I
and
think
development.
did 3 not go under equity and inclusivity?
Kind of.
I think it's strong enough that it could stand on its own.
Academic performance, because if low-performing students would be part of academic
Well,
performance.
that's true too, that's true
True,
too.
too.
You're right, you're right.
Sorry, I don't have a mic on, but
No, that's good.
what I meant.
All right. If you had to give a thematic label to number 4, what would it be?
Governance.
It seems like governance, which again is more board side.
I'm not sure
Number 1
what the
looks like
value.
equity too.
I feel like number 1 is the opposite of equity.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, it's something that you,
If you had to give a theme to number 5, what would it be?
Social emotional health.
Yep.
If you had to give a theme to number 1, what would it be?
Resource management, resource distribution, resource allocation maybe versus management.
All right. Well, we've got 5 topic areas. You don't need to have, you have anywhere from at least 1 and no more than 5 guardrails. More guardrails allows less focus. Fewer guardrails allows more focus. And so now the conversation becomes like, where do you want to go from here? At this point, folks need to start offering a rationale for why we would certainly keep one over the others. So if there was one that you definitely have to have, which one is it and why?
I think we definitely need number 3, because without that, we don't have a purpose for being here.
Yep.
Okay, then let's start with number 3. If you're going to have one guardrail for number 3, would it be A, B, C, or would it be something else that tries to combine or reword?
I think you could combine it to say that the superintendent will not make any decisions that negatively impact the academic performance of any student. Because all of those things are academic performance. Something to that effect, something that, without breaking it down specifically into the negative impact on college and career readiness, negative impact on underperforming, negative impact on, I mean, all those things are things that we don't want the superintendent to make decisions that negatively impact the academic performance of any student. I don't know if that's the all-encompassing statement, but that's kind of where they all are saying.
Got it. What other folks think about that? Does D work for folks as a potential guardrail under this topic or not?
It doesn't work for me because it lacks focus, because
Okay.
it's sort of like everybody. I mean, does that mean, if there isn't, if there aren't critical mass of students to take, Mandarin at some high school, that you have to provide it because it would negatively impact a student who wants to take it? I mean, I think it's overly broad for me. I'm more inclined to go with A or C as guardrails that have greater focus.
Anyone else?
I do think it's hard to, our students are in so many different places academically. We want them all to succeed, so I'm trying to figure out how can we,
I see it as like the doctor's guardrail of do no harm. That's how I see
The
D.
Hippocratic Oath.
but to Carol's point, I'm thinking about the very extreme, highest level of an AP course, a Calc C or something that we can't offer that everywhere because we don't have enough. I mean, is that a thing to think about? On the very edges of things, are we,
It would be negatively impacting those students, yes, so I think.
It would be,
But that doesn't mean that you have to eliminate those courses. You could then offer them as a virtual option and all the other things that we now know are available to our students that need extra above and beyond. That can be offered in their schoolhouse. I don't want to restrict any student because that AP French 5 may not be offered in their school and it's only offered at North Mac, and so they're going to patch those kids in by Zoom every day to a class. We have options now for those things that don't mean we have to make them go away.
good point.
Except that, I mean, I would argue that an online class is in no way equivalent to an in-person class. And that, this just, I mean, I don't see how we can not make any decisions that could negatively impact any individual student.
Which kids do you want to impact negatively?
Well, I don't want to impact any of them negatively, but we do not have unlimited resources. And, I've had parents asking for, foreign language in elementary school. Well, we're not offering that. Does that negatively impact those students? Yes, but we don't have the resources to provide it at every school.
Not doing it at any school, though.
Well,
Just those.
I'm just saying that.
You're saying how it could be interpreted?
Yeah, I think it could be interpreted that we have to offer whatever anybody wants. If they think
I
it's,
see that way, but that's just me looking at things from a more holistic, optimistic, and positive way.
I think the academic performance is the first, is the priority here. So, or is certainly a,
Can I,
that's, so we need to come up with something. So trying to get everything in one pot is hard.
can I throw something else in the mix to make it even more? But one of our original goals in the strategic plan that we did not capture into a SMART goal is every student has access to a rich, diverse, and rigorous curriculum. Is there something we can capture under academic performance that captures that as a guardrail?
I mean, I had a guardrail that didn't get on the list, which was do not allow schools to narrow the curriculum to tested subjects, which is kind of a narrower version of that, but seems to me an important guardrail if we're basing performance on test scores. And sure, you can bump up test scores if you quit teaching everything else and only teach to the test.
This is really difficult.
Yeah, it really is.
Excellent.
What about the superintendent will not make any decisions that limit a student's ability to have a rich and diverse curriculum? I don't know, whatever that, I remember Tom Tate, that's a Tom Tate goal, just so you know.
Rich and rigorous.
The student,
Yeah, vigorous or rigorous, that's all.
the superintendent will not deprive students of access to a curriculum that is rich, diverse, and rigorous.
Yeah,
I like that,
yeah.
like that. That says that.
Because I had thought about something that sort of has a baseline, that everybody has to have a baseline of things. So that kind of encompasses access, and rich and rigorous, I think encompasses more than tested subjects.
Right, because rich is in there.
Rigorous is obviously,
High standards.
Which is like the career and college readiness type of stuff.
Okay, we have one?
Is that it?
You all like this one?
I like that a lot. Maybe because we helped write it like six.
I know, because, well, it's consistent with,
6 or 8 years ago, but no, I like that, because I still think that's something that is, if I went out in the public and said, that's what I want, I think people would understand what we meant.
yeah.
It's broad, but I still think they understand that means challenging courses and on a diversity of subjects and tailored to the
and
needs of our
richly
diverse
engaging
students.
and
Yeah.
not just drill and kill kind of rigor.
Right, right.
EOG prep,
Right.
Which is what I think, yeah.
which was what, yeah. like Carol's comment.
All right, so we will hold on to this one for right now. Doesn't mean the book is closed on it, but we've got something about academic performance. And if you think that we need to modify it, or we need to add a second one about academic performance or whatever else, we can always come back to it. But let's put a pin in academic performance for a while. You remember, so we are at minimum threshold. So you could stop now if you wanted and just have one guardrail, but you can also go up to 5. Remembering that the fewer you have, the more intentionality will be poured into them. The more of them that you have, the less intentionality each one will receive. And so we generally encourage 3, but, to be fair, going up to 5 is allowable, but generally encourage 3. So that being said, you have 1. You could stop here, or you could add more. Just remember, from here forward, everything you add, you do so with the understanding that it has a dilution effect on the previous ones you've selected. That being said, if you had to have a second one, what would it be? Conversation's open.
I think equity and inclusivity.
Agreed.
Okay, so we go to item number 2. Are you thinking one of the 3 that's here, or are you thinking something else entirely?
I kind of like B.
Yeah, I think B is the broadest, and then they can come back with the interim guardrails that maybe captures a little bit more of what we were intending in A and C.
And would you say equitable treatment of students, families, and staff? Or would you just say students and families, because it's outcomes-based?
Well, we need to be student-based,
Student-based, that's,
too.
yeah. So that's why I just wanted, because that had the parentheses and families, and I just wanted to make sure.
I mean, obviously, the families impact the students and the staff impact the students.
But at its base, it's students.
It's just students.
Students.
I like the families because I think it hints at the idea of the culture shift, the welcoming aspect of it beyond just the
Yeah.
students.
I bet Dr. Jones, if she was sitting here, would take in on that one.
All right, so students or students and families?
Include families, I think.
I can live with including families because I do understand the intent of it, and families is a broad term and doesn't mean a mom and a dad or just a mom or whatever it means.
I think that-
Guardians and
And actually, if you
community.
look in the old things that we wrote, at least from a few years ago, it was kind of a broad term that we had about anyone who supports and loves the child, or we had some like really kind of warm fuzzy that we added there.
Like, as opposed to parents.
Yeah, instead of the word parents
I like and families.
and families.
You've got 2
Broad
down.
sense of the word family.
So you could stay with 2, or you could add more, or you could delete one of the 2 that you've got. What say you?
Could we go to, could I see 5? Could you roll up and let me see 5 again, social emotional health? Can't remember what.
There we go.
There you go.
Yep.
I like 5.
I just think we have so many important initiatives with number 5 that ultimately support academics, but I don't think 5 is going to get captured in a goal. I mean,
I'm with you there. It's not, I don't think it's going to get captured.
it's not going to get captured in a goal because the goals are all academic.
I'd be up with adding 5 and stopping with those 3.
Second.
I can do that.
Not a
Wait,
motion,
I just
but-
want to hear what Rhonda,
So my sigh on that one, the only reason I sigh on that one is because it's supposed to be about student outcomes, and it's still hard to tie all that together to student outcomes with social and emotional learning and development. Not that I don't support it, because obviously what we've seen in recent days, even in the Olympics, about social, emotional, and mental health, and the need for us to be cognizant of that is crucial. I just feel like perhaps we encompass that when we talk about not allowing inequitable treatment of students and families. That would include their social, emotional, mental needs, as well as a curriculum that's rich, diverse, and rigorous would also include social and emotional learning.
I guess I'm worried that if we drop all mention of social emotional health, we will then drop the initiatives from our budget. And I do think those initiatives are really important to, ultimately, to student outcomes, but not, but as a goal, it's, I mean, how do we wrestle with that, AJ, where the goals are very much student, the goals are about what students know and are able to do.
Mm-hmm.
The guardrails are values, like
Yes.
go
so-
towards those goals while honoring these values.
So you are certainly not the first board to wrestle with this particular question. And so the way that this is shown up for folks is you have options. You can have social emotional skills as a goal, as something that you want students to know and be able to do, or you could have it as a guardrail that describes what are the conditions that adults are creating for students. Most boards tend to lean in the direction that you all are leaning right now in terms of having as a guardrail as opposed to having it as a goal, only because the tools for measuring social emotional skills in students are incredibly immature. And so, for example, a common skill that people will think of in this domain for students is collaboration. And the question is, how do you measure the extent to which students have grown in the skill of collaboration? And so because that is challenging, most boards kind of shy away from it and instead say, instead of focusing on what the social emotional skill set that students have is, let's focus on what is the social emotional conditions that students experience are. The former would be a goal, the latter would be a guardrail. That being said, I'm currently working with another board right now that has gone the other direction. They said, no, we want students to have these skills, and so we're going to make it a goal, even though we have no way of measuring it right now. And they did, and they adopted it as a goal, and the superintendent is now tasked with developing a means of measuring it. And the superintendent's timeline for doing so means the board will have absolutely no data on this. Really, in their case, I'd say no meaningful data for minimum 24 months. And so this will be a goal that they won't really be able to monitor, but they will get regular updates on how the superintendent is doing regarding getting implementation in place so that they eventually will be able to measure it. And then in the back 3 years of their 5-year strategic plan, they'll actually have data come online that they can monitor. But that is a set of behaviors and actions that honestly a lot of boards simply aren't interested in, and so they go the direction you all have gone. So you can go either direction. It can be about what students know and be able to do, or it can be about the conditions that adults are created. It can be a goal or a guardrail. But that choice is up to you all. But I suspect, I don't know your school system well enough to say this definitively, I suspect you all have no way whatsoever in place right now to measure growth regarding students' social emotional skills.
We're getting there with the panorama
That
screen, but I
explanation
don't know if
makes
it
sense
does
to
it
me,
yet.
and that was part of my reason for having some like angst over it. So if you put it as a guardrail, it's not measured, but it's saying, we do think these are important, even though we know we can't measure it, but we do think, it's kind of like soft skills. And gosh, we used to have a statement that we talked about 21st century learning. and 21st century skills and all that collaboration, all those kind of soft skills that are really not easy to measure. But if you ask a college admissions person, they're like, we would love to see kids come to our college that have great soft skills, great people skills, but there's not measures. So I think that putting it as a guardrail, AJ, that was a great way. I mean, for me, I don't want it in goals. I'll be okay with it here saying we will not neglect to do that. Whereas it's not, so I could do that.
By having it, by having it as a guardrail, that means instead of measuring the student's skill set, you'll be measuring the, what kind of conditions adults created in which students learn. That is the difference. On the goal side, it's a student outcome. On the guardrail side, it's an adult input. But like I said, some boards have chosen to. I'm of a belief that you can measure anything if you're willing to invest the time and money into building out the measures for it. So anything you want to measure, you can. But the question that most boards run into is the juice worth the squeeze? And most boards decide that it ain't. And so they lean the direction you all have leaned. But yeah, y'all can lean whichever one, and then I'll certainly work with your administration on it. I heard someone mention Panorama in my district where I serve right now. We use surveying as well as a way of tracking one of our guardrails also, and we happen to use Panorama. I know plenty of other districts that use Panorama. I know a number of other districts that use other vendors, and I know of a handful of districts that have worked with local university to develop their own.
So we good with that?
I would be okay with that being the third guardrail.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and let it limit to 3.
I'm not sure if I want 4 and 5 though. Let me see.
All right, so here you are. Is there a way to make this go? No. Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, so are you all able to see all 5 categories?
Yes.
All right, so now you're at 3. As before, you could stop or you can continue adding. The choice is yours. What say you?
I say stop.
Stop.
I'm good with those 3.
Yep.
So, any other comments, reflections? Anyone else want to be heard on the topic of guardrails? Right now, you have 3 potential guardrails. There's still several steps left in the process. There's no vote taken tonight, and we're not at a place of finality. But anything else anyone wants to say or be heard on the topic of guardrails? All right, hearing none, then we will check those off. I want to talk a little bit about next steps for this, but before we do that, we have unfinished business in the land of goals.
Okay.
So when we left last time, we had reached a place of consensus on a secondary math proficiency goal and a post-secondary readiness goal. What we had not done yet is really dig into this idea of a 4th goal around student growth. And we still have to square what to do with an early literacy goal. But let's start here with student growth. What say you all? Keep it, delete it? What do you want to do?
Carol had a comment?
Well, for me, growth is a wonderful thing, but it can be used as a measure, as a monitoring measure more than a goal. I mean, growth is great, but if the kid still can't function at grade level or can't do the things that need to be done, that doesn't demonstrate what the child can do. No one can do. I think monitoring student growth as part of progress monitoring on all these things is important, because that says the likelihood of reaching some academic goal as opposed to having growth being the goal in itself. So I would delete that.
Sean?
Got it?
So growth is one of the two metrics that we're measured by. So, I mean, we can argue about what growth is and isn't and all that sort of stuff, but it's one of the two metrics. And in fact, this board has, for as long as I can remember, argued that we need more emphasis on growth, not less emphasis on growth. And so we argued that the state grading scale shouldn't be 80-20, it should be 50-50. Raising the percentage of growth from 20 to 50%. And so it seems inconsistent to me to say that growth doesn't matter, only proficiency matters, when we, every single year, say that growth does matter, and in fact it matters more than the state gives us credit for.
I don't see that as inconsistent. I think these are very different things. I think it's unfair of the state to use as a measure to give a grade to a school a score that is more closely tied to socioeconomic status of the students in that school to anything else. So I think because the state grading scale is unfair, I don't think means that it needs to be part of our goals. I mean,
So I mean, growth is a priority, and that's why it's in our legislative agenda. I mean, it's not, I mean, we also, proficiency is a very important priority. But when I think about these goals in this student outcomes focused governance framework, they're supposed to be about what students know and are able to do. And I'm not sure if that's the format here.
So the way that we are graded and our students are graded and our schools are graded says that growth is absolutely one of those key metrics, and in fact, one of the two key metrics. And it's not just our state legislature. When secretaries of education sit before the Senate to be confirmed, they talk about growth.
But can you turn this
This is one of the
into,
two most important academic metrics there are.
what is it that students know there or are able to do? Like, can you capture that in the wording?
So we did this last time. Dr. Barnes, do you want to explain what growth is, or shall I?
Well, I don't need the definition of growth. I need,
And may I interject one comment too? That goal is also written about the percentage of schools, looking at the whole school, and it's not focused on students. So as we do directly, so if we do re-wordsmith that, it's got to be the growth of students increases by a certain amount, not looking at the whole school, would you think?
So the school is an aggregate of the students
Yes.
within it. And so by schools, you would be affecting students. If you're evaluating the number of
And
schools,
I understand that. I'm just thinking it needs to be somehow written where it's directly the goal of the student that we're monitoring and not the whole school. This is the way it's worded. I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
but-
so the growth metric is defined at a student level, and the aggregation of such takes it to the teacher and the school level, and ultimately the district level, right? That's just aggregation of those numbers. And so when this goal was created, it was to ensure that what we were doing was taking actions to improve the growth metric in our schools, which by definition improves the growth metric for our students, which by definition means that they are growing more than they would do in other schools, because by definition, growth is a relative term across their academic peer group in the state. And so what that's saying is the students in those schools would be growing more academically than they would be if they were in the statistical average school in the state.
If I'm not mistaken, and maybe it's not true anymore, but at one point, teachers were some of the things that teachers were evaluated on or looked on is how much they grow a student. Did they grow them at 0, which is 1 year? But we know if students are behind in proficiency, we can't just grow them a year because they're still going to be at the same level of proficiency at the end of that year. So one of the things we look at, and I know anecdotally, I always go back to my friend that was a 3rd grade teacher at Oakdale that had one student pass the BOGs for reading. And obviously it was the 3rd grade, but by the end of 3rd grade, all but one student passed their end of course test. So we know she grew her students by 15 months or 18 months, and they achieved proficiency in reading, which they wouldn't have if the growth had not been there. So, we don't want, in any school, we don't want people that are flat. We don't, if a teacher can grow a student more than an academic year, that's how we gain proficiency. We're never going to gain proficiency if we stay at 0, correct? 0 is par. That means they grew 1 year that school year. We don't want that. Even for our high flyers, we want the 3s to become 4s, and we want the 4s to become 5s, and we want the 5s to become high 5s. So I do support that growth is crucially important, and I've been part of the legislative group that has pushed for this to be measured differently at the state level for the since we've had a legislative committee. This has always been something we've pushed for, a more balanced look at growth and proficiency. Knowing that if a student is not proficient, they're not where they should be, but the only way to achieve that is by growing more than a year at a time. So I'm kind of torn with that a little bit.
Well, acknowledging the value of it, I'm still wrestling with, is it the way to measure how we're, going towards a goal? Or is it the goal in it of itself, of what students know and are able to do? It feels like it's a metric. Carol?
Maybe it is a
I think one
metric.
of the challenge with, and I see Dr. Barnes on the screen, one of the challenges of the growth metric is that it is very opaque. And it's not, the numbers that are portrayed there do not say this child grew 15 months. It's a comparison of cohorts, and, met growth in that band can mean actually they grew less than a year.
Not disaggregated growth, though.
But
we have that data too.
But it's not something that is easily understood. I mean, one of the challenges I have as I talk to people about growth is the general expectation is, oh, my 1st grader is now reading on the 3rd grade level. That's what growth means. And they think that the test, the met growth exceeded growth means that they have gained more than a year or whatever. But and I'll allow Dr. Barnes to correct me if I'm wrong, that's not what that growth metric means. It's a comparison to other kids in the state who are matched in a cohort. And, frankly, if Raleigh has a really great or really poor year, that would make our kids look either really good or really bad.
Thank you. What Mrs. Sawyer is saying is basically correct without making any value pro or con for the particular measure and discussion, is that the current iteration of this growth measure, remember the acronym EVAS is for Educator Value Added Assessment System. This fundamentally talks about how much value a teacher or a set of teachers add to a student's education, not the quantity of how much they have grown over a period of time. And it makes the assessment of how much value a teacher or set of teachers added based on how much students with a comparable academic past have performed over a span. Said differently, it looks at everyone in the room, assuming that each of you had the same kind of academic past, and it looks at how much you grew or how much you moved in 9 months. If everybody moved just 1 inch, but someone moved 2, that would be the mean would be 1 inch. So the person who moved 3 inches outperformed the expectations. would be above the 0, would be above even a 2. But if everyone grew 3 feet and someone grew 1.5 feet, they would have not met the expectations and they would be in the negative. It's very much a relative measure of value add, not actually how many months or years of academic progress have been made. That doesn't make it fundamentally a good or bad measure. We just need to understand fully what it is and how it could be used by the board if you so choose to apply it here.
So if that's what it's doing, is there any measure that we can use that will show you acquired information for a year and a half worth of information rather than just a year's worth of information? Each individual person or the whole class?
There's different things that we couldn't say how many months. We'd have to probably design or purchase something. Within the EVOS, it does say if you met like a projected measure, if you will, but it doesn't say you got 3 months or 8 months or 9 months or 1.5 years, if you will.
So Dr. Barnes, going back to your definition of EVOS, and let's try to take this back to your classroom example where you are doing a statistical analysis of the classroom students' advancement over the course of the year, and those students relative to their peer academic cohorts. And I think what you said was the EVOS model determines whether that teacher was able to provide additional value to those students to accelerate their learning beyond that of their peers. And what this goal says is it is our goal to have teachers in a school accelerating the learning of their students beyond that of their academic peers. That's exactly what this goal is. It's unclear to me, I'm sorry, why that's not a good goal.
Well, is that an adult?
It needs to come off our legislative agenda where it's been.
Well, is it an adult input? Is it a goal about adult input, or is it a goal about student outcomes? Because there are a lot of good goals.
It's
that are not-
100% about student outcomes.
It sounds to me like it's an adult input which leads to student outcomes, but it sounds to
It
me
is
like
a
it's
measure
input.
of student outcomes. And it is also a measure of this district and every school and educator in it.
I'm not arguing against it. I'm just trying to understand how it if it fits in the framework, and maybe it does. Margaret.
What I want to do here is sort of pull us back to the big work that we have to do. And I think that probably all of us could agree that the first 3 goals we have with an early literacy, a secondary math proficiency, or some sort of math proficiency, and our post-secondary readiness, we can all very much agree are very much aligned to the strategic plan that we have, that we want, that the community has asked us to concentrate there. Now, I think that growth is helping us get there, but in terms of what we can measure now, and I think the measurements of all of these things that we'll pick up are understood by the community. The vision is there for us to be able to do that. So I would say that while growth certainly is very important to us, that right now, all the first 3 things, it's going to take, I think that really pulling all that together is what we need to do in this first gyration of our student outcomes focused governance. I'm not saying growth is not important, but I just think let's figure out what we really have got to focus on And I think it's those, I personally think it's those first three things. So I came into this thinking we would have no more than 3 goals. So that's where my head is right now.
Can you scroll back to number 1, please?
But actually, before we leave 4, can you help, AJ, can you,
If I could see number 1, it would help me crystallize the thought. that I
oh,
have.
okay, yeah.
So without growth, we cannot achieve literacy, math proficiency, or post-secondary readiness. So really, growth is incorporated in all 3 of those goals, and it's going to be a metric. Am I kind of going, I think that it's going to be a metric that's going to have to be measured, and it's going to be a standard that's going to have to be adhered to from a staffing standpoint, from the EVAS, all those things. But if you don't have growth, you're not going to accomplish the reading readiness, the math proficiency, and the post-secondary.
Can it be one of those things to help us in our examination of these 3 goals? I mean, I think you're saying the same thing. I feel like we can use that information in 4 as we are examining how we're doing and how we're in an interim and an out, at the beginning, middle, and end of those 3 goals. So
Like, as we're
less concerned about the
monitoring.
percent of schools, because that is what the fourth one says, the percent. I'm more concerned with the percent of students. So the percent of graduates, the percent of 9th graders, the percent of 3rd graders. I'm more concerned with those than I am the percent of schools. The school isn't, so, which the kids have to be successful for the school to have the numbers too. So in what I'm thinking, Sean, is I really do want the growth to be a huge thing that we're looking at and measuring of all our main goals, if
I
that
think
makes
it
sense.
can be discussed within every single one of those.
And
as
it
we're
does fit
talking
into
about
them.
it.
If we
Yeah.
don't have growth, then we're not going to accomplish those 3. And it's going to have to, and then the growth of the school itself would be factored in. So I think that's kind of where I'm landing on it.
So I think you've just made the case that it's redundant.
It is redundant.
But it's
It's
not.
included in the top 3
Well, it's
already.
it's a
actually-
means of monitoring.
Okay, guys.
It's a means of achieving the first 3 is growth. At least in my thought.
I understand. It's a different measurement and metric and objective, right? To say that the majority of teachers in the school are growing their students substantially, more so than their peer group, means that the majority of students are growing more than their academic cohort. That's different than saying the majority of students are proficient. That's why the 2 exist, regardless of whether we look at ESSA, whether we look at the
EVAS.
the school report card, any of those things. They are 2 different things, and I don't know how to explain it anymore, right? I mean,
No,
we've
I mean, I
actually
totally-
had
but I
a
get what
member
you're
here
saying.
say, I don't understand it, so we shouldn't include it. So,
But I do
Well, if you're
understand
referring
it.
to me, I think that's not fair. Well, what I'm trying to say is these are goals that we want our community to rally behind. I would say that if you asked people who are not in this room, if they could define student growth the way Frank defines it, as it is defined by EVAS, it would be very hard to find people who would interpret it in the way that we know it's interpreted, which is it's a comparison measure, and basically to achieve what you've said, I think you're saying everybody has to be above average, which is kind of a statistical problem. And I think
that's not what that says, actually. So that's the problem, is that it's being mischaracterized.
If our goals are to be embraced broadly by our community and our staff, I think it's important that they be straightforward and easy to understand and interpret.
Well, then I think if you ask the community what a state high school endorsement is, then most of the 95% of
We're gonna
them
have
won't
to
know
do
that
some
either.
educating
So,
on that,
I mean, if
yeah.
we're going to get into that level, then we need to change it to a different kind of
Well,
community.
maybe we do, but
I mean, I'm
I'm
just telling you, I
saying,
don't think anybody
that-
knows what that means. So Sean, I think you and I are sort of on the same page. I'm just looking at it from a different perspective of that we've got to have, I think that we've got to look at that metric of that growth in each one of those. And that's going to be where we are going to put staffing metrics in to do these measurements of these goals, where we're going to get reports on. I think that we're going to have ongoing looks at that. I mean, I think that's where the rubber hits the road with all that, is if the staff is not fulfilling the growth needs, then that's a problem. It's a big problem. We haven't been getting that level. I think that's something new that we're going to have. But so I would support 1, 2, and 3, but just be aware that I don't think most of the population understands what a state high school endorsement is.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to do some educating on that,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely. But I think people will understand about it's the courses that you take in high school, and it's how you finish. So I think we can do that. I think that is the thing. But to your point,
Just, and even using the word CCR, we need to make sure that we're not putting acronyms into the document that are not readily,
Right.
I mean, that's Creedence Clearwater Revival in my head every time I see it, which probably shows my age a little bit. Jennifer's like, who is that?
I know who that is. Thank you.
Scott knows
But I
who that
appreciate
is.
you calling me young.
But you are young and you may not know who CCR is.
John Fogerty is.
John Fogerty or any of that. So, I mean, I'm just telling you that sometimes our acronyms, and I work in medicine and we use a ton of acronyms as well. So let's just make sure that our acronyms are not in there, like we are using the whole word, because we could, or put parentheses CCR, college and career readiness, because I can just hear people humming John Fogerty every time we say that.
So I want to jump in here. Frank, you still with us?
He's laughing.
Yes.
Frank, I got questions for you. For growth index exceeds 0, what data set is that based on?
That is the index that EVOS creates around it. So 0 represents like the mean, not like the mean.
No, but which data is, so this
It's
is?
based on end of grade or EOG and end of course
Gotcha.
performance.
Got it. So it's calculated one time per year because the data is only available one time per year.
That is correct.
All right. So just a few things worth clarifying, because I think it's important that you all make informed decisions. I would absolutely describe the content of item 4 as a student outcome.
Okay.
It is a roll-up of a bunch of data, and it's provided in a mathematically digested manner. But it is pure-blooded 100% student outcome data. And so make sure that as you're making decisions that you're not making them thinking that it's not.
Okay.
The other thing I would highlight about number 4 is that there are generally 3 main types of goals that school systems lean toward. Proficiency-related goals. Here is a bar. What percentage of our students exceeded this bar? Comparison-related goals. Here's how this group is doing. Here's how this group is doing. How are we bridging the gap between them? And then finally, growth-related goals. This cohort of students started here. How far did they move for a given period of time? All 3 of those, proficiency, growth, comparison, entirely appropriate for a board to choose as a goal if it so desires. And so those were 2 questions that came up. One, are growth items appropriate for goals? Sure, if that's what you want. There are plenty of boards that have a mix of proficiency and growth. In fairness, I think most boards wind up going with proficiency goals, but probably for the same reason that you all discussed here, is because overwhelmingly, I think states inappropriately focus on proficiency. I know during my time at the agency, we actually redesigned our state accountability system and did go to more of a 50-50 proficiency growth model. And then correspondingly, I feel like we've seen more boards opt into growth goals as a result. And so just know those are all appropriate things if you want to do them. So that's not an endorsement to say do that or don't, but I do want to make sure that you are making decisions having the correct facts. That is a student outcome. Growth goals are appropriate. The other thing that I would say, growth index exceeds 0. Nobody's going to know what that means. State high school endorsement. Nobody's going to know what that means. Scoring a 4 or 5 on the Math 1 EOC. Only high school parents will know what that means. CCR level on ELA. Only parents, those students taking those assessments are going to know what that means. And so across the board, you have a nomenclature challenge that if that's meaningful to you, I would just signal that, and I'll work with your staff and we'll cure it. Most likely what that winds up looking like is, and I don't know that what I'm about to do is accurate enough, so I'm not doing it for accuracy. I'm just doing it, as an example to give you an idea of what I would work with your administrative team to do. So say we decided this is what we're going to use. Then maybe instead of saying the percentage of schools whose growth index exceeds 0, there's percentage of schools who, showed appropriate growth, in parentheses, where growth index, exceeds, 0, will increase from blah, 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 blah. And so finding ways to use some type of colloquialisms, because a lot of people talk about appropriate growth, but then we're never specific about what that actually means. And so using something like that, and then, using parentheses to identify, to further define it for those who are curious, is appropriate. Or I've even seen some boards, delete this entirely, and do one of these jobs. And then later on in the document, put that forward to let people know, hey, if you're curious about what exactly we mean by that, this is exactly what we mean. And so if you're worried about how are these things languaged, then just know that I hear that. I think your superintendent hears that. And in the next stage of this process, we can attend to that on your behalf. So those are the things that I wanted to highlight that I heard in the conversation. Just want to put those things out there. That being said, you've got 4 potential categories for goals. 2 of those you've already clearly articulated what I heard of a consensus, hence why they're bolded and the others are scratched out. I'm not clear what the consensus is on number 4, so I'm going to come to that in just a second. And then once we're done with that, we'll go back up to number 1 and see if there's any magical solution to creating a 9-person consensus around that one. So with that additional information, what say you on item 4?
So that's very helpful to me, and I've got to say, when I think of EVOS, I so often associate that with teacher input, the teacher effect on the student, and that's how I think of EVOS, as measuring the teacher effect on the student, which is why my brain went to input versus outcome. But with that explanation, I'm good with it as a measure, as a goal, because I like having proficiency in our goals and growth in our goals.
This kind of will match almost where the state is. We've got 4 goals and 3 of them are proficiency related. One is growth, and the state's 80-20, and so we'd be 75-25. So there is some mathematical, there is some mathematical coordination there that might just be the universe
we want it
speaking to
50-50.
us. So we can sing some John Fogerty now.
I have a frank question.
Yeah.
EVOS scores don't apply to individual students, do they? At what level do they apply to individual teachers, but not to individual students?
Frank, what are you thinking?
Well, I hate to say it, but because Ms. Lennon, I'm thinking I was not down in the corner, nor was I born in a bayou. So I'm really struggling. My Clearwater Creedence songs now in my head.
I got
for
everybody
the-
singing that tonight.
So I'm sorry about that, but you can look at, did a student kind of meet a certain percentile goal as prescribed, and it rolls up to teachers. But individual students don't have necessarily an EVOS rating or EVOS label, meaning met expectations or exceed expectations or did not meet, if you will. That doesn't mean it can't have merit or value or should be here or shouldn't be here. That's just not necessarily how it's used. Because once again, it's trying to look at kind of how the aggregate teacher did or the school did, and then you have different things for each student in each different level.
That was the concern I was trying to express earlier,
Yeah,
just
because
to
that,
talk
in
it
that
out.
case, it really is a measurement of a school for families.
Do
Okay,
EVOS,
Frank,
is there an EVOS score for different subject I mean, like in elementary, is there a math EVOS score and a reading EVOS score and a music EVOS score?
In the tested areas, so math, English language arts, there can be one for science, there can be one for your EOCs.
Frank,
Yes, sir.
when a teacher sits down and looks at his or her EVOS score, that's broken down by quintile, and that teacher can go into the quintiles, and what is in the quintile? There's students. And there's a number by quintile, the disaggregated growth by quintile, which is an aggregate of the students' growth scores. So I think you just said there's not an EVOS score by student, but each student is assessed a growth score, the aggregate of which rolls up to the individual quintile that student is in that teacher's class, the aggregate of which rolls up to the teacher. And so every
That is
student
accurate.
does
That's right,
actually
Mr. Stone.
have a growth score, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What Mr. Strain articulated is accurate.
So growth, we need to quit talking about
But
EVOS
is
and just
that-
talk about growth.
But is the individual student growth score considered, I mean, is it, I thought EVOS was designed to be analyzed at a higher level than the individual student. Have they changed that? Was it, when it was first put forward, it was not to be used for evaluating individual students?
What both of you are saying is accurate, and that it's meant for kind of a larger assessment of, say, the teacher or the school. It's rounded, not rounded, that's not the right word. It rolls up from the individual student to the individual teacher to the school for that tested subject and tested grade.
Okay, Frank, when teachers start off with a student and they assess them and they're saying you're reading at 1.1 and you're in first grade, and halfway through the year the student has moved through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and moved up to 2, but they're still in first grade. So to me, they've exceeded growth. They were supposed to go from 1 to 2 and take the whole year, but they got from 1 to 2 in half a year. But you're saying EVOS doesn't count for that?
What EVOS would look at is all the students who had 2 data points, and if those students in that same grade level across the state, not in the school, not in this district, but across the state, all got a 2, the 2 would be the average. That would be then meeting the expectation, no matter how far or how short that was. And then they'd look for students who then either exceeded that average or was at least 2 standard deviations, we'll say substantially lower than that average. But it would have to look at all the performance of all the students first to determine how much growth should the average student with that performance background make, and then assess you all based on how you are compared to that average.
but the teacher herself or himself is looking at, I accomplished this student growing from 1 to 2 in half the time. So in their mind, they have exceeded the growth which was expected to take the whole year from get to 1 to 2.
If everybody else in the state did the same thing, you didn't exceed it.
Okay, so they're saying if everybody grew a child from 1 to 2 in half a year, then that's 1.
That's an average. Jennifer?
Scores or some other type of
Or
index.
do we have to specify the growth measure?
Yeah, because we're still, right. Well, but even putting the 0 index, like if we took that out, then we could leave it up to staff, or maybe we do define it. I'm just throwing it out here. Maybe there's a different, I like the idea of a growth metric, but I don't know that it has to be based on just that end of grade test. Maybe we're looking at a different index or evaluative tool.
Yeah, it sounds like.
What do you think?
It sounds like we're chasing a
Well, it's your, I mean,
Yeah,
Sure.
no,
And
seriously, I mean, are
everybody
you
that's
open
cool.
to that?
So
I mean, would
here's
that,
the thing.
yeah.
The state evaluates us on that number. And
so
that
that's
number
the-
represents, sorry, AJ, that number represents the ability for our teachers to work with their students to advance beyond, you know, the standard for that academic cohort advancing. And so I'm a fan of aligning our goals to the goals that we are measured by, which I actually support. And in our legislative agenda, we have beaten the table as loudly as we possibly can to say we want that metric to be more important in the evaluation and assessment of the quality of our schools
than it currently is.
than it currently is.
I'm there.
Carol?
I just lost my train.
Measurement?
Yeah. Do we know as a district how to coach teachers to improve their EVA scores? I've talked to too many teachers who year over year, their EVA scores bounce around, and they don't know why some years their EVA scores are great and some years they're not. And I think if we don't know how to coach teachers on how to improve their EVA scores, I think we know how to coach them to improve proficiency, but I'm not sure we know how to manipulate, how to coach teachers to improve the growth score, the EVA score. That's my issue with it.
And isn't that, Frank, because of it's dynamic?
It's relative.
It's dynamic. It's comparing us constantly to how everyone else is fluctuating around the state.
So as a goal that we are going to hold somebody accountable for, I have a hard time holding someone accountable for a goal if there isn't a clear path to how you get there. Because frankly, you know, if Wake County changes their curriculum and their scores tank next year, they're probably a big enough pot in the state that our growth scores are going to look good if we're in the 4th year of a curriculum adoption and have already figured it out. And the converse is also true, that our EVA scores depend on what happens all around the state. And that's why I'm uncomfortable with it being a goal.
So what I would recommend is, I think we're going to chase this tail for a while. What I'd recommend is, it sounds like what the board might benefit from are some options. And so I would recommend that we effectively table this and pick this up in the next round of the process. Because the next round of the process is receiving actual data back from the administration. So if you look at all these right now, they say from X% to Y%, and so on and so forth. They don't actually have anything filled in. And so the next round of the process is once the board says, yeah, these are roughly, the set of goals and guardrails we want. The next phase is the administration will come back, fill in the blanks, and offer some ideas around what the interim goals and interim guardrails will be. And so I would recommend putting a pin in this, and when the administration comes back, and come back with actual data, as well as if the administration wants to put forth any recommendations for alternative growth metrics, for the board's consideration, then you can make a final decision with that in hand. The key decision points are, do we want a growth metric as part of our goals? Yes or no? I hear a leaning toward yes. What specific metric do we want to use for measuring growth? I hear arguments, for something that is less of a black box. I hear arguments for something that is aligned with the state. I think a little more data than you have today will help with that. And so my recommendation is let's accept what I hear as a rough consensus, that there's an interest in holding that as a potential goal going forward. And then let's instead pour the remainder of our energy for the time that we have left into trying to square up on goal number 1, early literacy.
Cool. I think that makes sense.
So, what do y'all want to do? Early literacy. You've got 3 options. You could pick one of these. You could delete early literacy entirely. You could try to craft a 4th one. What say you?
Well, if I could walk through the 3. The first one focuses on Black and Hispanic students. The second one captures all students. And then the third one focuses on decreasing low-scoring students. So I feel like the third one has a sort of a deficit mindset instead of a what we're going towards mindset. And between A and B, I think it's a it's almost a marketing difference, or I don't know if it's a philosophical difference, but I think I've heard a lot of conversation from board members saying mathematically to accomplish A, that will lead to accomplishing B, and you cannot accomplish B without accomplishing A. So it's kind of like the same goal, like the 2 goals are interconnected, but it's a matter of what you say you're focused on, which is the vision that we've got to, that we've heard from our community. So that to me is the dilemma. With that being said, I would lean towards A, which is not to say that I don't value all students, all 3rd graders doing better on their English language arts EOGs. I want all ships to rise. I think in order to get that, we have to name where we have to put the most laser focus, which is also, a huge proportion of our community, of our school district, which is Black and Hispanic students. So I'm a fan of naming what we're here to do, but that it does not say that we completely ignore white kids. I see Carolyn and Jennifer.
I think the other thing that makes me lean toward A is that, as we discussed last time, that these are not forever goals. These are short-term.
Meaning because we're halfway through the.
Right.
They are until
They are
2024.
until 2024. So this is a tightly focused goal for a tightly focused time period. And that's why I feel A is the choice I would like to make.
Especially while we're coming out of the pandemic, which hit us, hit Black and brown kids disproportionately harder. Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the reasons why what you just described, that I had introduced a guardrail of that we would not, negatively affect any other students by choosing A. And I know we didn't ultimately go with that guardrail, and that's fine, but that was the spirit with which that was put forth, because I do think it's important that we name where we really have a crisis at the moment. And I know that I've been speaking with, different community groups over the past few weeks, and I was with a Latino group the other day and sharing with them that the literacy rate was the lowest at 27.5%. I mean, they're just blown away. And they agree. I mean, that's just, one that was, 5 people only. I'm not trying to overemphasize. It certainly wasn't representative of the whole community. But nonetheless, I do think it's important that we, to Carol's point, goals change. We had a goal that focused on 8th grade Math 1. Now we're looking to change it to 9th grade focus. This is where I feel like we have to name a specific focus. And I like also that this one is more narrowly defined, but our goal number 2, 3, and potentially 4 are more broad, are not as narrow. So it's not that all of the goals lean in that direction, but I do think it's a statement for our board to name specifically where we would like for the superintendent and all the staff to put in not only resources that we'll dedicate, but also just attention to the importance of this.
Brianna, what do you have any insight into this?
No, not really. I think that we have a lot of goals that are targeting our elementary school and our high school level, but sometimes we tend to neglect our middle schoolers. So I don't really see a goal in mind for our middle schoolers. And for our 9th graders, I don't see a problem with us addressing the Black and Hispanic students directly, because they are disproportionately scoring lower than their counterparts. So for us just to say our Black and Hispanic 3rd grade students, I think that is a fine idea.
Margaret?
2 things I want to bring up. AJ said that, after we come up with goals, that staff would come up with data. And I'm looking at our percentages in all of these, and I want to have doable things. I want us to stretch, but I want us to be able to do them. So I would encourage us to pull out some numbers.
Yeah, the 32 and the 65.
Yeah, and all of those, and see, we've got them, we
More
can remember
information
them
to get
and see
there.
how they compare, but I would really like for staff to see, if it is not possible without, bringing class size down to 6 kids, that's not realistic to tell the community we can do that. So I want to really be able to do the possible. I do think that
is part of the next step.
Okay. I do think that calling out specifically is a good thing. I would like us, if we do that, I think to have a guardrail, like we mentioned. I know that's more than we had anticipated, but I kind of think that would be helpful for our community. This is a new thing, and I think we're going to have to do a little bit more to pull us all along. So I would kind of like that guardrail to come into play as well. So I could support with the guardrail that Jennifer indicated. I will say Rhonda had to step out and leave for some family things, but she was supportive of B. So I wanted to put that into the space. She did not indicate to me an additional guardrail, but she was supportive of B.
I wish we had Ruby and Lenora here too. Oh, sorry, Brianna.
Ms. Marshall made up a great point, and it had me thinking, if we put these vast goals on the proposal, I'm afraid that we might lose the learning aspect of education. We might just have our teachers wanting to reach these goals and missing the point that we want our students to be learning, if you understand what I'm saying. So the students won't be learning, but regurgitating the information in order to meet these goals. So if we make these astronomical goals, we're not going to have proficient results, but just results that we'll be seeing. So I just want to keep that in mind if we make these big percentages, because it'll be hard for us to jump just in 2 years and seeing these vast changes.
Yeah, I would agree. I would want for now all the goals to be written X percent to Y percent and get a sense of what's attainable.
That is the next step in the process.
Anybody else?
I think in our last conversation about this, I expressed my support for B in that you can't achieve B without achieving the others.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not unnecessarily focused, but yet it encompasses the others because we clearly statistically cannot meet what we've set in the objective we've set in B without actually achieving the others. So it's a, if you will, a higher level goal that you literally can't achieve it without meeting the other objectives as well.
And the reverse is also true, that if you meet A,
That's not actually true. The reverse
well,
is
I
not
guess
actually true.
if a whole bunch of
Yeah.
white students crashed at the same time that Black and Hispanic students were increasing, then that would not be true,
That's correct.
which is why the guardrail matters.
Right.
What do you all want to do?
Brianna has a question.
Can you elaborate on that one, like just a little bit more? So then I'm like trying to understand. So if the Black and Hispanic students increase and the white students decrease, then that'll be an inequity. That's what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that, so what is our percentage of Black and Hispanic students in the district? What percentage do they make up? the district?
36% Black and 27% Hispanic.
So 38 plus 27, so, okay.
That's 65.
So 65, so we're saying 65% of our students who are currently, those students are struggling. If we pour our energy and our focus and our priority into supporting these students, bringing them up to the 4s and the 5s on their EOGs, that will most likely bring up the whole overall percentage of third graders who are increasing, they're getting the 4s and the 5s on their EOGs. And Sean is saying not necessarily. There could be a universe where the white students, the demographic that's not called out there, at the same time that Black and Hispanic students are rising, perhaps white students are cratering, and
So
in that case, they would offset each other. I don't know that that's what you see in districts that have adopted goals like this. I don't
So
think
whites
it
aren't the
is.
only other demographic in the
That's true.
district,
Asian,
right?
But
So
they like-
there is a broader set of demographics than just whites, blacks, and Hispanics.
true.
And so what I'm saying is, let's focus on bringing up the district, the overwhelming majority of which is Black and Hispanic. The only way to possibly get there is to raise the blacks and Hispanics, it is actually possible to make decisions to raise the proficiency levels of our black and Hispanic students that negatively impact the other students.
But
But you cannot actually achieve the goal that's set for the entire district without raising the majority population.
But white and Asian students across the board always perform higher than black and Hispanic students. That's not just in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District. And even if, like, you don't focus that in the public schools, just systematically it's going to be showing that they will be proficient. And even if they fall slightly below than their normal average, I don't think that they would fall terribly below like where the black and Hispanic students are currently performing. So I think that the proposed goal is fine. And I think that it needs to be an emphasis on black and Hispanic students because like you were saying earlier about the inequities, we're not describing inequality, we're describing an inequity. If you see that someone needs help, that does not mean that you're neglecting another group of people. You're just trying to help the people that need help, and you're focusing on them. That does not mean that we're not focusing on them. So I just wanted the public to realize that what I'm saying is not to neglect the white students. I'm saying to put an emphasis on the black and Hispanic students that are disproportionately failing at a higher rate than our white students and Asian students.
You said it better than I could say it.
I was hoping that if we just talked through this some more, that we might reach a place of consensus. That appears not likely to happen. In the absence of consensus, the clear majority view of those seated around the table is to proceed with A. And so for the time being, I'm going to indicate forward movement with A and into the next phase of this. Now, remember, the next phase of this conversation doesn't mean that any of this other stuff is just completely scrapped. But what it does mean is that we're getting more data about the few items that we have here. And then in the context of additional data, of additional facts, then the board may yet choose to reduce the number of goals or to significantly change them. I want to talk about what those next steps are. With these as the ideas for goals and guardrails, the next step is to have the administration take these and apply actual real data to them. So we fill in all the variables. In addition, one extra task that I'll work with the administration on is to try to find ways of languaging them that are more user-friendly for people who don't eat, sleep, drink, education data all day, every day. And in addition, the really important point for you as board members is I'll work with your staff to identify the interim metrics, the interim goals and interim guardrails. That would be the data that is looked at throughout the year, the data that is think of this as your lead, where your goals and guardrails are really lag indicators, your interim goals and interim guardrails are really your lead indicators. And so the next step is you need to see how is your administration interpreting the goals that you've put forth, the guardrails that you put forth, and you'll know how the superintendent is interpreting them because that will show up in the interim goals and interim guardrails. And so the next time that we come together for this conversation, it will be with a draft set of goals that have been updated from what you see today, and a draft set of interim goals, 1 to 3 of them for each of the goals. A draft set of guardrails that may be upgraded a little bit from what you see here today, and a draft set of interim goals, 1 to 3 of them each, or interim guardrails, 1 or 3 each for each of the guardrails. So that is the next step in this process. That is, and even that meeting is not when the intention is to, vote and bless these things. That meeting is the next step to gain clarity to make sure that the items that have been brought forward actually match the intention of the board. So with that description of the next steps, what questions do you have about the next steps in this process? What questions, concerns, curiosities do you have about our next steps?
Anybody? Margaret?
You say that's a lot of information. It's a lot, so it's really tying more of this in together, but you still don't expect us to bless it, put it in ink even next time.
At the next meeting will be the first time you had a chance to really debate as a governing team the extent to which the superintendent accurately interpreted what you meant by your goals and guardrails. I think maybe once I've seen that flow through with a perfect interpretation. It is just highly unusual. Normally what happens in the next phase is the board members are confronted by the reality of their ideas and quickly realize that not all of them are as genius as board members might have originally thought. Or they start to realize that some of the trade-offs are not things that the board intended at all. None of these are things that you could possibly know right now until you're presented with actual real life data on each of these topics and the progress measures that would be used to track these. So there's no way to know whether or not you actually like these goals and guardrails as much as you think you do until you have that next layer down of data. And so generally what happens there is people are like, no, that's not quite what we meant. Let's make these tweaks. And then at the meeting after that is normally when some type of blessing or adoption occurs.
Okay.
Once those tweaks, once those adjustments have been made.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Other questions, comments about next steps?
I'm not seeing any questions.
One other thing then to know is that once the administration has identified what are potential interim metrics that are used to be measured progress, the administration will also then work to put together the first draft of a monitoring calendar. One of the other things that the administration knows that you are not in a good position to know is when does data actually become available? And so based on the interim metrics, the administration will come back and say, this particular data set becomes available in April. And so we're recommending that you monitor this in May. This particular data becomes available in October. So we're going to put it on the board's calendar to monitor in November, that sort of thing. But plot it out for each month between now and the target date of your goals, which puts that into essentially July of 2024. And so the idea is that you can actually have a calendar of what are the main things that we're going to be focused on in each of our board meetings every month, month by month, from now through the middle of 2024. And so that is another important work product. That calendar actually belongs to you, not the administration. But because they know when data becomes available, it makes this sense for them to put together the first draft of it. So that is the other critical next step that will happen between now and when we come back together. I'll have to get with your administration because we can't really put together a date right now on the spot to check with your administration. But Mr. Superintendent, I recommend we try to figure out what is our timeline and be able to at least tell the board what the timeline is no later than Tuesday. And so a little bit of time to sit down with your staff and think, how long do we think it'll take to pull this data together so that we can have something to present? Ideally, let's try to see if we can sort an answer out to that question by Tuesday so the board will know when this will come back. Board members, this is a lot of homework that you're asking. It's not at all uncommon for this to be 2, 3, 4 weeks that it takes to crunch all the data and to bring back meaningful recommendations to the board. But certainly my team and I will work aggressively to make sure that your administration has all the support they need to knock that out as quickly as possible. So those are the next steps. Any questions about monitoring calendar?
I just want to also recognize that we're getting ready to open schools in 3.5 weeks, so I want to be cognizant of that too, but also not take our foot off the gas. So.
And that's why I said, well, it'll probably take the superintendent a few days to track down how long will it take to be able to come back with all of this data crunched for you. But I'll work with your team on that. As is always the case, for me and my team, I see Jamoke Hinton from Oakland, board, and a former, president of the council is one of the other coaches with us this evening. From our team to yours, thank you for letting us be a part of your journey. We look forward to reporting back in a few weeks.
Thank you, AJ. I'm thrilled we got so much done tonight.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Great work.
Thanks, Jamoke. All right, see you next time in Zoom land. I will now entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved.
Second.
Motion from Carol Sawyer, second from Thelma Byers-Bailey. All in favor, please raise your hands. All right. No opposition, right? We are.